Okay, so we're on time. I think we can begin now. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Raquel Chalet, and welcome to today's session. If you have any questions about Zoom today, feel free to send me a message in the chat so that I can assist you. Now, I would love to introduce to today's speaker, Cindy Ellis.
Thank you, Raquel, and thank you everybody for coming to the warm-up class today. I decided to talk with you about warming up in general in philosophy and what the purpose is. I know all of us enter the practice room maybe some days not with the most enthusiasm. And I think my goal today for this class is to help you remember that if you enter the practice room with a real purpose and a set of goals and sort of having your intentions set at the beginning of your warm-up session, hopefully you're going to have a more productive time in that practice session, a more productive warm-up session. And I wanted to address this from a performer standpoint, from a student standpoint, from a teacher standpoint, because all of us have different musical needs, the goals are different. The goals are no different, but the musical needs are different from a beginner student or an advanced high school student, say. So I have a little document that you can follow along with. Raquel, if you could put up the strategies and purposes document to screen share for us, we can kind of follow along with that as I'm talking with you. There you go. So why do we warm up? What is our purpose? Well, first of all, to get the body ready to perform. Now, I actually conduct Laguna Flutes, an adult flute choir, and some of my members are a little older, shall we say, not 10-year-old beginners. And I think as we get a little older, perhaps physical warm-ups, stretching, neck rolls, working with your wrists, making sure that your wrists are supple and flexible, even finger spirals, taking each digit individually, and you can see that I'm doing this on the screen, and rotating the fingers in clockwise and counterclockwise. I have found this a very wonderful thing to do in the orchestra very quietly, as I wait for long tacits. If I have to come in on something pretty fast on the piccolo, for instance, and I've been sitting there for, I don't know, 10 minutes, counting 200 bars rest, this kind of little gentle warm-up can get me really ready with my facility. So physical readiness is an important part. I think as we age, it becomes more important. To focus the mind for the tasks at hand. And that's a little typo there, it should say at hand. We need to get in a calm space for whatever we're preparing to do. I mean, remember, our warm-up might be for the beginning of the day's practice session. It might be a warm-up to ready yourself to do a presentation. It might be a warm-up pre-concert. It might be a warm-up pre-rehearsal. All of those warm-ups have some commonality to them, but they all have different end game goals. So you need to kind of calm the distractions in your mind. Sometimes that also means putting away your devices. If you're a student in a practice room and you're trying to get ready for your day and warming up and you're getting constant text alerts, you're going to be distracted mentally. So you need to deal with that. My third point is to bring the body and mind into flute-specific readiness. So we are here to accomplish our goal of making music through the flute. Breathing and tone, or sonority. Breathing is the vehicle through which is delivered. Now, one of my favorite things to talk about is dynamic long tones versus static long tones. When we started our long tone routines as students, I'm sure we all were familiar with the Moise matching long tones, right? This kind of thing. That's more of what I call a static long tone. You're just really working one note matching to another. But dynamic long tones working through a melody, like in the Moise Tone Development Through Interpretation book, or any of the Philippe Bernold texts, which I'll be talking about a little bit later on, where you're actually working through a melody and working with dynamic shifts as well as intervallic shifts. I think these are powerful vehicles for warming up. Sometimes I think maybe some of my colleagues who are doublers have a harder time doing static long tones and achieving their goal of flexibility. You need to warm up for what you want to do. So an intervallic small melody might be a better tone warm up for you. We need to make sure our embouchure is warmed up. And what are the goals of our embouchure? We need to have infinite flexibility and also strength, because we need to have our endurance up so that we can play through a whole concert without fatigue or loss of focus. Harmonics are one of the most powerful things that I use as a daily warm-up. Interval practice, arpeggios, and any kind of crescendo diminuendo exercise. These are all extremely important for warming up your embouchure. We need to warm up our fingers, and we want fluent technique, or our fluency in our technique will be achieved through scales and arpeggios. It's all about patterns. This is very important to remember. I know that in my teaching, a lot of my students will initially perhaps rebel against practicing scales. And I did too when I was a student. But the whole thing is, when you come down to it, about 80% of written music is scalar in its nature. So if we can learn the patterns ahead of time, we have done ourselves a massive service in learning all of the repertory tasks at hand. Lastly, warming up our tongue, articulation, single tonguing, double tonguing, triple tonguing, flutter tonguing, and that little parenthesis there, less movement is better always. So when you're double tonguing and single tonguing, we want to have the least motion possible in the mouth. Remember that the tongue is powerful muscle in our body, and we can easily get too much action going with the tonguing. So I like to think of my tongue as just pivoting a little bit inside my mouth. So those four areas, breath and sonority, embouchure, fingers, articulation, all of those things really encompass the physical flute-specific readiness that we need to achieve when we're warming up or starting our practice session. So your general goals for practicing, my next little point here, I think first and foremost, we want to maintain the joy of music making. So often, I have even heard students say this, I'm going to go do my long tones, like, oh my gosh. The whole point is, your sound is your voice. If your sound isn't great, you're not going to be able to say what you want to say musically. The joy of making music is your primary number one goal. That's what it's all about. I think also we're here to get into creative problem solving. One of my favorite little warm-up tricks, if you're working on a piece of repertory that has a couple of nasty bits in it, tricky passages for the fingers, I actually learned this when I was in college. I would Xerox that one or two lines of tricky stuff, and I would tape it on another piece of paper. And then that piece of paper with all the tricky bits from my repertory was a warm-up sheet for me. And I would take that with me to my rehearsals in the wind ensemble when we were all warming up before class. I would just run through those tricky sections all the time, so that no matter what, I was busy preparing, and I had a goal to prepare and creatively problem solve for something that was bothering me in another area. So you can do things like that to make your warm-up a little more of a multitasker. And I think the third goal there, achieving readiness for the next musical task at hand. Most of us are warming up to do something else, right? Whether that's something else be a rehearsal, a longer practice session, a concert. All of those things have different readiness levels. Impediments to your goals. So distracting thoughts. I think all of us have that inner critic in our head that we perhaps listen to too much. And you need to remember to use positive self-talk only, and also tell what to do, not what not to do. So one of the biggest kind of breakthroughs for me as a student was when I realized that giving myself the command, such as take a big breath, rather than don't skip that breath mark. I had a big breakthrough in telling myself what to do. Remember, when you're on the traffic, in your traffic circle or a street, and you see that big red octagon sign, it says stop. That sign does not say don't go. It tells you what to do, stop. Always tell yourself what to do. Use the positive self-talk, not don't screw up that note. You should tell yourself, get that pitch. Tell yourself what to do. Commanding yourself in the negative is never going to turn out as you thought it would. So we want to make sure how carefully we use that self-talk. We've already talked about distracting environments, right? So trying to not have screens, not having distractions. I know in college, even the practice room environment can be a little bit distracting because you'll have the tuba player next door over here and maybe the pianist next door over here, and across the hall there's a woodwind quintet rehearsing, and just being able to put that bubble around you and just be in your own sonic world. That can be something that takes a little bit of training to focus in. The time at hand for your warm-up. So sometimes people have overly ambitious goals or overly ambitious agendas for what they're doing. So I use what I call pocket practice sessions sometimes, just 15 or 20 minutes where I want to get one specific thing done. I'm going to work on this page of this symphony and rehearse it for my next orchestra rehearsal, or I want to work on this etude just for 15 minutes. I think giving yourself a time limit and a concentrated amount of time can be a very effective way to control any practice situation or warm-up session. Is it a long daily warm-up as a prelude to more intensive practice? So on big days, if I'm not performing, I might have a bigger practice day at home, and my warm-up is going to be more extensive. I'm going to be taking much more time through all those areas of flute-specific readiness. If you're getting ready for a rehearsal, you're probably mostly invested in making sure everything's working. Again, those areas of flute-specific readiness, sonority, breathing, embouchure, fingers, articulation, and you're probably going to be looking at some specific technical things. How can I make sure this goes off well in the rehearsal? So that's a different kind of warm-up. And a pre-concert routine. When I'm on stage and I'm rehearsing for a concert, I might go over a passage slowly, not necessarily at tempo. I might not play full dynamic range. I might do a little bit different kind of warm-up when I'm on stage or before a concert than when I'm having a big practice session. So the thing is, you want to link your warm-up to the purpose for which you're preparing. And in bold here, I think this is a really great point to always remember. If you're not ready to focus, try at another time. Success breeds success. Creating positive habits is powerful. So I know that, as I've said, I remember in my student days, there were some times when I just could not get my mind ready to go for the task at hand. And I think one of the best things you can do rather than fight it is just shut the case, go outside your practice room, get a drink of water, walk around the block if you have to, come back and start again. If you're too distracted mentally, the mental chatter or whatever, something else is going on in your life, it's okay. You don't have to fight through something. Just reset and try again. So that is kind of the framework that I wanted to begin our discussion. With warming up, this last thing I wrote, new versus familiar. So A lot of us do the same thing day in and day out, and there is value in routine. There really is. I know I do a specific kind of harmonic exercise, but there are many. And every now and then I'm going to change it up and I'm going to do something a little different. With materials for warming up, I think a lot of us may be just stuck on Tafanogo Bear, perhaps, because we use that in college and that's what I've always had, and I'm always going to do the same thing. Well, there is value in trying out other repertory that helps you with the same concept. So let's pull up the suggested repertory sheet. And all of these handouts are available, I think, after the session. So Raquel, if you could put up our suggested rep, there we go. So I tried to pull together a list of some of my favorite books that I use in rotation with my daily warm-up. So warming up from a book is a wonderful thing at a more advanced level. I certainly wouldn't recommend any of these things for beginning students because they're just not really set up for beginners. But for adult students, for college, high school students, all of these books are really fantastic. One of the most fun projects for me when I was asked to serve on the pedagogy committee a number of years ago, I was part of that committee that set up the repertory guides in the beginning. And we were reviewing lots and lots of repertory. And that's when I first really got fired up about looking for new materials. And that spark that was lit in me has kept on burning. And so I'm always on the lookout for new things. Paul Edmund Davies has written a fabulous book, the 28-Day Warm-Up Book for all flutists eventually. It's really challenging. It's got lots of great things in it for you to use on a daily basis. He has a website, I think it's called Simple Flute, and there's a lot of material on his website if you're a member there. He also has written The Consequence of Sequences, another book, much like the 28-Day Warm-Up Book. Fantastic ideas for daily use. During the pandemic, Paul was quite prolific and put out a lot of material because he, as all of us were silenced from stage work, he was busy writing. The two volumes that Philippe Bernaud has written, the Embouchure book and Le Souffle et le Son, both of these are fantastic books that I do use them with my students as well as for myself. Fantastic warm-ups. Of course, our tried and true Tafanel, which we probably all met in high school, and all of the Marcel Moïse books. I've listed just a few, but Moïse, my favorites, Exercice Journalier, the Etudes and Exercice, of course, de la Sonorité. Probably that was, I think, the first tone warm-up book that I worked with in college. The tone development through interpretation and scales and arpeggios, but there are many, many more that he has written. Robert Stallman's Flute Workout Book, again, a fresh approach. Remember, it's all patterns, folks. It's all the scales and arpeggios, but every author has repackaged them, so you're getting new material, fresh material. Nothing's worse than a stale warm-up where you're on autopilot. Georges Barrere's Flutist Formula, the Macaré daily exercises. Oh, there's a little typo there. Peter Lucas Groff's The Singing Flute and Flute Checkup are excellent sources, particularly if you're interested in developing your 20th and 21st century techniques. There's some great things in there for you. Trevor Y, of course, has a series that has the complete daily exercises as well as individual volumes, practice books for tone, articulation, intonation, and vibrato and technique. Now, the asterisk are the books that actually seem more suitable to high school players. Let's see, we have a question that's come in here. What is the Macaré daily exercises like? He has a set of about 7 or 8 exercises that you can do in every key. They're scalar and they actually progress to wider intervals throughout the book. So a little bigger challenge as you go through the material. It's fantastic. So that's our repertory list, and I'm sure there are many more books, but I wanted to put together at least a few for you to give you other ideas if you're feeling burned out, if you're feeling stale, if you're feeling like, gee, I need some new material to get me excited. And, you know, it's always good to take fresh approaches. This is hopefully a place to go. So before we continue, I wanted to see if you have any questions. If you want to hit the chat, we'll take time to see if there's any other questions, and then we'll continue going on with the presentation. And if you have any questions about Piccolo too, that's another area that I can perhaps offer suggestions for warming up, because that's a whole little specialty for me. Any questions? Okay. Give you guys a second. All right, so let's put up the next screen share of that little chart, Raquel. Let's get that going. Okay, there we go. So what I put together in this chart here was, this is mostly, I hope, helpful or useful for the teachers out there. And I tried to set this up as sort of a rubric for how to address the warm-up for different levels of flute players. So with beginning students or elementary school students, the warm-up goal and purpose. At this level, most of our students are just trying to get the hang of it. They need stability of hand position. They need a lot of reminding about correct posture. They need to just really understand what it is to be able to put the flute up consistently in the same spot. And of course, we all know, just starting with the head joint first for beginners, right? For a long time, they should not put the flute together until they're 100% consistent on finding that spot. Beginning students, very beginning students, need to be reminded about articulation, because so often in the beginning band programs, teachers are too busy with everybody else to continually reinforce the value of articulation. I see so many students that start private lessons, they don't even know about using their tongue. Young beginners need to be reminded about fluent notation reading. Of course, writing with letters above the notes is never a good idea, because they'll be reading that forever and they'll never learn to get fluent with the staff unless that is taught. And it's our responsibility as teachers to make sure that that happens. So with a beginner students, a warm-up length, you got to keep it really short. I think the biggest option for me, at least, is the option is to accomplish warm-up through the lesson materials themselves. I don't even segment out a special warm-up. It's all about skill building and mastery, and you must keep it fun. For notation fluency, oftentimes I'll just do a lightning round with students with flashcards and see how fast they can name notes with a set of flashcards, and then they get a sticker or a prize. That keeps it fun. So with your youngest students, I think warming up can be folded into the learning during the lesson itself. With intermediate students or junior high level, the warm-up goal or purpose is all of the above, all those things from the beginner and elementary level, plus additional attention being placed on musical readiness. So using passages from the repertory as a warm-up, which I suggested earlier, I think that becomes very important. And I think you can begin to stress the idea of event readiness. So tell them what to do before their first competition or certificate of merit evaluation. Tell them how to make sure that their flute is lined up properly. Even that simple reminder to that level of student, making sure that the foot joint is in the proper alignment, making sure that the head joint is exactly where it needs to be with the body. Those kinds of things, believe it or not, that can be part of a young student's warm-up routine, making sure that the flute is ready to go. The length of the warm-up really kind of increases as the interest and skill mastery increases. Obviously, with junior high age students, you can have total beginners who are in the 7th grade, or you could have a kid who's played flute since 4th grade and has quite a bit further along in their musical journey. So flute-specific readiness should begin in this area, in this level of player, the intermediate player. They should begin to learn about harmonics. They should begin to learn the value of a finger study. Those kinds of things need to be taught to them by the private teachers, because they're not going to have the time in the school programs to teach that. Let's see, moving on to our college students or pre-professional or advanced. I kind of lump that all in one area. For many collegiate students, the goals are now moving into career readiness. So audition preparation and mental preparation need to become part of the process of practice and part of the process of warming up. Goals become more time sensitive. So as you're teaching more advanced collegiate students or pre-professional students, having a jury, a recital, or an audition, these kinds of goals make the warming up for those goals become a different kind of event. So you need to change it up a little bit. I think at this level, working through the various printed materials is important. I think it's very important to move students through various warm-up materials, such as I suggested on the what did I call that? Suggested repertory sheet. I think it's time to take students out of the same thing and get them into other materials. It's okay to not keep Taffenel Gobert as a daily warm-up for 4 years of college. I think it's very important that it not be used all the time. And I think more than ever, we should be stressing ergonomic correctness, posture and correct hand position, posture, head, neck position. All of this is very important to start stressing, because as those practice hours mount, this is the breeding ground for a repetitive stress injury. So you need to make sure that if you're guiding a young professional or collegiate student, you're always keeping an eye on them and making sure that those habits are good, there's healthy body mechanics, so that you're not getting into any kind of injury prone area. You know, more than ever, we're all on devices, we're all on our phones, we're at computers, we're using our hands in a very different way than we did even 10 years ago, even 20 years ago, if you think about it. So we need to protect our students, protect ourselves from any kind of ergonomic flaw, which can lead to injury. The length of the warm-up is completely, at this level, it is task dependent, so, and or time available. So if you've got a collegiate student who's preparing or warming up for their jury, they may only have 10 minutes. This is a good skill to learn, because in a professional audition, sometimes you only get a 10-minute warm-up. But sometimes you might have a warm-up that can go 45 minutes because you're going to spend your next 2 hours in the practice room working. So this is a variable length here. For the professional player, I think it's very important to warm up every day with flute-specific readiness, daily work, and maintenance. You are never too busy to work on refining your skill as a professional, and you need to do that. You don't want to be just phoning it in or relying upon the good work that you put in years ago. I think as a professional, your prep is for the task at hand, very much so, because you'll have a different warm-up for rehearsal than a concert than for your daily practice at home. Again, keeping the body in that relaxed, efficient state is very important, so you don't have any kind of overuse issue, and to constantly monitor your physical ergonomics. You know, it's interesting to me that how you feel in your job can be dependent upon your chair. Our orchestra has a whole wonderful set of chairs for on stage, but when we're on our mobile stage, they're not so great. I'm a tall woman, the chairs are pretty low. I need to bring a little seat cushion so that I'm sitting up high enough and tall enough. Being aware of your surroundings physically and what you need to do to adjust optimally, that's important. And when you're setting up to get ready for a concert, you need to kind of take a quick inventory. What can I do to make myself comfortable? It's very important. And of course, again, the length is task dependent. Concert, daily practice versus a rehearsal, and that's the length of your warm-up. I know the NFA has a lot of adult amateur members, and I think for adults, the joy of music is what it's 100% about. For many of my flute choir, all of my flute choir folks, they're coming to have fun. And I think a lot of the warm-up should be readiness of the body and mind for music making, quieting the mind, getting focused, ready for those rehearsals or concerts. Warming up the ears for active listening. So one of the things I always do in my flute ensemble group warm-ups is making sure that I give them a specific thing to listen for, whether it be vibrato speed or dynamics or intonation. I rotate the concepts per rehearsal so that everybody kind of is using those ears, because remember, when you're in the practice room, these ears are your teachers for that time. I view my teaching as sharing, ear sharing, right? Because I'm listening to my students in a critical, loving way, and they are not hearing themselves the way I do because they're behind the flute and I'm in front of them. So remember that, you know, learning or teaching your students and teaching yourself how to listen to yourself to accurately correct things without criticism or judgment, that's a very important thing that we need to be aware of at all times. And of course, it's a task-dependent length for adult amateurs. You might have, in a busy day, you get home from work, you might only have 15 minutes to devote to your flute that day. So you're not going to spend all 15 minutes on scales because you've got to look at your music, right? So you need to have a very short little warm-up that's efficient, and off you go into your other practice. So hopefully this rubric or grid is kind of giving you sort of a summary of the points of what we were talking about on our strategies and purposes for warming up. Let's see here, we have something else in the chat. I want to get to that. Okay, from Barbara King, she says, I would like advice warming up on the piccolo. I've just graduated to solo piccolo on our community band. Congrats, that's cool. I've used Moise de la Sonorte, but when I get into the high register, some of the other players complain about long high notes. Well, Barbara, I totally get it. I totally get it. So I'm so glad, Raquel, I sent you that piccolo multitasking warm-up. If you could put that up on the screen, that would be great. Barbara, this warm-up is for you. So during the pandemic, Erica Peel, solo piccolo with the Philadelphia Orchestra, put out a little email blast to piccolo players across the United States and internationally, and suggested that we all pull together and write a warm-up book, which is on my website. You'll see a link to that, and is on Erica Peel's website as well. And this particular little warm-up exercise was my contribution to that that effort. And it was so fun because, and I laugh now because at the time we put that together, we were thinking this shutdown would only be for a couple months, and how naive were we? But we all came up with some really great original etudes. So this little warm-up is something that I wrote, and I think it's really useful. My piccolo is somewhere close by. Let me grab it. Hang on. So, Barbara, what I was talking about in earlier in my session, the difference between a static warm up and a dynamic warm up. This is a great example of something that's a little more dynamic because there's a lot more moving notes in here, but there is a slight long tone component at the end. So when I warm up on piccolo, I really like starting low, foundation, and then getting higher. I know the Moïse book, if you're working from De La Sonorité, is going to start on this note, right? Because Moïse called that the teacher note. The B on the flute, there's only two keys that are down. The rest of the tube is open, right? All the other keys are open. And it's a note that has a lot of ring and it sounds pretty fabulous, even if you're not warmed up at all. And that's why Moïse kind of called that the teacher note. And it's just a very easy note because there's not a lot of resistance. The tube is pretty open. It's not a bad idea to start on that note on the piccolo, but I feel with this instrument, for me, I like to start low and go high. So what I did, with this warm-up is incorporate a lot of ear work and intervallic work into the warm-up. The interval of a fifth, which I end with in every key, is something that is really important to start hearing and locking in. You're also being linked to the tonic throughout each line or each key of this exercise. So it's written then just to progress up by half steps, right? And so on. So if you can scroll down for me, Rachel, you'll see you get to the very bottom here. And then when you get to this spot, you should go right back up to the top if you can scroll back to the top. And then try that 8 VA, right? And then you keep working your way up. I think you're going to find that when you warm up this way, you'll get less complaints from your neighbors and you will have less of that almost tonal shock. If a lot of piccolo players tend to warm up on piccolo like they do on the flute, and if you've ever been around I don't know, a master class, a residency, or a flute dorm, it just sounds like an aviary with people playing high notes and just ripping up scales as fast as they can. You probably shouldn't do that to warm up the piccolo, because I think you need to start low, grow the sound as from bottom up, and I think it's a little more humane on your embouchure because you're going to start more relaxed. A lot of people play too tight on the piccolo, and I'm convinced that that's a result of not getting the low register really open, as open as you can. Another fantastic thing to warm up the piccolo is to sing and play. Thank you for that screen share, Rachel. That's great. We can make that document available to you, Barbara. I think Rachel will be able to do that because the other documents were available to everybody on the class. So warming up.
Thank you. Yes, I'd like to get a copy of it. So thank you very much. Yeah.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. Another fantastic thing, and I've used this on my flute playing too, is singing and playing. As a piccolo player, a lot of piccolo players raise their larynx and tighten their throat too much to get the high notes. So by singing and playing, you have to keep your larynx low in order to sing and play. And this is from Nicola Manzante's book, this exercise. So you heard me singing a drone D, and then you arpeggiate over that drone, D, F sharp, A, as you're singing the D, and then you play the arpeggio without the sing and play. If those of you, if you have your flutes or your piccolos and you want to keep yourself on mute and you want to try it with me, we can. Let's try it again. So low D, you're going to sing the low D, hold it, and then arpeggio. Here we go. And then you would keep going by half steps, right? So you'll be, again, start low, always start low. And this is a very powerful way to make sure that your throat is open. Likewise, as long as we're talking about, what we might think of as a 20th or 21st century technique, flutter tonguing, fantastic way to make sure that you're using enough air, because you cannot flutter tongue and skimp on the air, right? So you will see immediately if you flutter tongue and play a robust forte and then play the same little tune or whatever you will without the flutter tonguing, you should see that it's a much more open sound. So there's some fantastic things that we can use, tools in the toolbox, that I always like that phrase, use the tools that you have. Because they're there for you. They're just not something that you see in a piece now and then. And if you have a piece that has flutter tonguing, you're always ready to do it because you've been doing it as a warm-up, right? Great question. Thank you for that. If there are any more questions, this would be a good time because we're coming down to our last 15 minutes or so of our time together. See if there are any more questions, or if you want me to demonstrate some harmonics or something. The one thing that I should probably talk about with harmonics a little bit while you guys are thinking of questions is, okay, here we go. Oh, good. We have some great questions coming in. Fantastic. And I'll get back to that harmonic thing in a second. What ergonomics problems do you see most frequently? A lot of times, I think the biggest thing that I'll see are wrist issues. So it's important to keep the wrists pretty clear. Don't have that big angle here. This can be a huge problem. So you want that to be one straight line from the crown of the hand to the elbow. And here, likewise, we don't want this great big bend here. We want to see a nice line from the crown of the hand to the elbow. So those are things that I see. I think a lot of people play with their necks way far out here. Remember, keep your neck right here on top of the spine. Balance there. Do you have any advice for switching between flute and piccolo mid-piece without tensing up? Yes, I do. First and foremost, practice the switches. So a lot of people will practice the part in segments, like you'll practice all the flute stuff, then you'll pick up your piccolo and you'll practice all the piccolo stuff. But what you forgot to do in the practice room was practice the actual switch. I think the biggest problem that most people have is when they get to the piccolo, and especially if it's a quick switch, you won't get right in the magic spot on your lip. For me, I play piccolo slightly higher on my lower lip than I do the flute. And just identifying that and knowing where home base is and knowing that I need to have that piccolo in a slightly different spot was mind changing for me and life changing. So make sure that you have that exact placement. and practice the switches. And it does take, sometimes these composers give us a bar of rest to make the switch. It's almost not enough. So I know in our orchestra, I have a little tray on the music stand that my piccolo rests on. It's easy to pick up. Make it easy whether you use a peg or you have a little tray that you put on your music stand. Hopefully it's easy for you to grab the instrument. I'm not a fan of leaving piccolos on laps because, they roll. So be careful with that. Quarter tone useful in warm-up. I'm sure it is. I don't use quarter tones much myself, but harmonics, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. One of the things with harmonics that I was going to mention earlier is it's not necessary to do harmonic work from the bottom to the top of the harmonic spectrum necessarily only. I think that there's a lot of value in just doing a little bit of harmonic work. Right there, I was going between G and then the harmonic from the C, the same pitch. You can do left hand scales. As a way to access higher harmonics. I know a lot of students have a dickens of a time getting the highest harmonics when you start from the bottom. And all they do is sputter and make the Bronx cheer or the raspberry with their lips, and they just have a real hard time. I think it's important to access the higher harmonics in both flute and piccolo with those left hand scales. I think that's going to really help you. I know somebody said something about demonstrate harmonics on the piccolo. You have to have a lot of support. You have to support a lot, but notice I didn't do anything here to tense. So when you're doing harmonics, I think especially if you're trying to access upper harmonics in the piccolo, don't start from the very bottom. Kind of start mid sequence, and I think that will get you where you need to go without getting overly tense. Warm-ups for switching instruments: flute, piccolo, alto. Okay, so if you play alto flute, and I play a little bit of alto in the orchestra, mostly on pops concerts, and occasionally chamber music stuff will come through for alto flute. If you're a piccolo player, I think one of the best things you can do for yourself is when you're playing piccolo, if you start to feel that you're getting too tight, immediately go to the alto flute. That will open you up because we need to have a much bigger aperture to play the alto flute. The biggest problem, if you get too tight on piccolo and you get that, your lips buzzing together, your aperture is actually closing, the alto flute can be the perfect antidote to getting you to open up, to getting you to relax. So that would be a fantastic thing to do. For me, when I come to the alto flute, I think the biggest challenge for me is my hands are so much further apart and my fingers are much more spread apart, that I need to do a little bit of work acclimating my fingers to that bigger switch, especially in the right hand. Okay, can you slowly explain upper harmonics? Yes. Okay, so Barbara Nicoletti asks, can you slowly explain upper harmonics using left-hand scale work? You bet. So we're going to play, if you have your flute, join me. We're going to play from G up to C. Now, finger the same notes, but you're going to play D, E, A. Okay, you want to try that again? Let's do the whole thing again. So G, A, B, C, then we're going to finger D, E, F sharp, G from the harmonic. Let's try it again. So you're going to finger G, A, B, C, G, A, B, C. Finger G, produce D, come down. Did everybody get it? Everybody got it? Barbara, I hope so. Yes? I see the head nod. Yay! Okay. And then transpose up half step. Yeah? Good. Excellent. Excellent. So that is a really awesome, awesome way, like I said, to access those higher harmonics without starting at the bottom and getting tense. It's very critical that when you do harmonics, you don't just muscle them out with lip tension only. It's a support and lip angle. It's achieved, getting through the harmonic series and getting those upper notes to speak is achieved through changing the angle of the lips and the support much more than it is tightening the lips. If you get those upper notes by tightening, you're missing the point. So very critical that we get the harmonics the right way. Good. Those are fantastic questions. I'm watching my clock carefully. We have about 8 minutes left. If anybody has any other questions, let's definitely thank you for those, all of you who asked questions. That's fantastic. And if you don't have a question, if you want to just leave a one-word answer in the chat about where you're viewing from, that would be kind of fun, just to know where everybody is today. I think that's always fun. Is there a flute edition to practice with the experts? Great question, Barbara. I'm not sure if anyone did this for the flute, but it is a fantastic idea. La Paz, Bolivia, Lancaster, Michigan, Alameda, California, upstate New York, Wyoming, Portland, Winnipeg, Canada, Ann Arbor, Tennessee, Quincy, Massachusetts, Iowa. Oh my gosh, some of you people are very cold. Michigan, Winnipeg, Canada. Excited to go practice. Yes, Vancouver, BC, Canada. Thank you, Jennifer. I'm glad you're excited to practice. That's great. Yeah, it's gorgeous weather here today. I'm not going to lie. After I'm done, I'm probably going to put on shorts. It's been in the 80s here. Patty Evans says, thoughts on offset G versus inline. Have never had trouble, but should one be concerned at an older age? Well, here's the deal. I've had offset G for years. When I was a student, I found a flute that I loved, and it just happened to have an offset G. I'm a pretty tall gal. My hands are not huge though, and I have a very short ratio with my little finger. So my little finger is very, very, very tiny compared to my ring finger. So for me, because of that short pinky, the offset G actually, when I think the reason I fell in love with that flute, it was so much of a fantastic fit for me. Once there used to be kind of this maybe old wives' tale, or somebody felt that acoustically the offset G affected the flute. I don't think that's true. I don't think, if you're not having problems, I wouldn't worry about it. For me, this just feels better. And I would not play an inline G for the world. I just love my offset. I also would not ever be without a C-sharp trill key. I always call it the best $600 option money can buy, because it helps you with the high G to A trill. That's the best part of the C-sharp trill key. Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you, Patty. It's fantastic. And thank you all for letting me know where you are today. It's just a real joy to connect with you. And I hope that you're all excited to practice. I hope you have, for the teachers, I hope you have some good ideas to help your students as far as what a warm-up is, what the purpose is. And I hope for yourself, maybe you're walking away with a new idea about the kind of what we need to accomplish in a warm-up, what the purpose is. As far as you know, practicing, this wasn't really a how to practice seminar, although that's one of my favorite things to talk about, is making practice efficient, because it really is about accomplishing your goals, the joy of music and making sure that you're always excited and happy. And if you're not feeling that way, come back another time. It's really okay. So thank you very much, Cheryl. I play for fun in a community band, but always looking to improve. Yeah, and that's the thing. Your goals are your goals. You know, it may be, some people think, well, you know, I'm less than because I'm not a professional. That's not true. Our goals are important to us at every level and equally valid. And I think that's a huge thing. Patty Evans said, am I still playing my LaFan head? Yes, I am. I love my LaFan head joint. And on my piccolo, I have a monk head joint now. And I love this head joint. It's really suits me well. So yeah. Patty says, me too. Yeah, the fans are great. All right. Any last questions or thoughts would be fantastic at this point while we wrap up here. I think I got to all the questions. Clarksville, Tennessee. This is great. Yeah, I think I got, oh, one new message. Thank you for attending today. I hope you all walk away with a few ideas to help your warm up. And Raquel, I'll turn it back to you to close out.
All right. Thank you so much, Cindy. Thank you for your time. Thank you for this awesome presentation. Thank you everyone for joining. I hope you had a great time as much as I did. I hope you have a good day and see you next week.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for coming. Bye.